Let's talk about the number one herb you should seriously think twice about if you have high blood pressure, heart rhythm issues, are under chronic stress, or are taking certain medications. Because this one is so widely misunderstood that people often consume it thinking they're helping themselves while unknowingly pushing their blood pressure and electrolyte balance in the wrong direction. And before I even name it, pause for a second and think about what herb could possibly be powerful enough to interfere with hormones, sodium retention, potassium loss, heart rhythm stability, and blood pressure regulation all at once. Because the moment you understand what it does inside the body, you'll realize why this is not something to take casually or daily without knowing the risks, especially as we get older or if we already have cardiovascular vulnerabilities. And the key danger here is that if you consume too much of this herb over time, which many people do without realizing it, you can start retaining sodium aggressively while simultaneously dumping potassium at an accelerated rate, and that combination alone is a perfect storm for elevated blood pressure, muscle cramping, weakness, fatigue, and in more severe cases, heart arrhythmias that can feel like skipped beats, fluttering, racing, or irregular pulses. And this isn't speculation or alternative theory. It's well-documented physiology that has landed people in emergency rooms. And the herb I'm talking about is licorice. Yes, the same licorice that people drink as tea, eat as candy, or take as capsules and powders for digestion, adrenal support, coughs, ulcers, stress, inflammation, or immune health. And the reason licorice is so popular is precisely the reason it can become dangerous, because it is not a weak herb at all. It is pharmacologically active, and it directly interacts with your hormone regulation system, especially cortisol, which is your primary stress hormone. And here's where things get interesting, because your body has a built-in protective mechanism designed to prevent cortisol from getting too high for too long. Since chronically elevated cortisol will raise blood pressure, increase blood sugar, break down muscle, weaken bones, suppress immunity, and disrupt heart rhythm. And that protective mechanism is an enzyme known as 11-beta-hydroxysteroid, dehydrogenase type 2, or 11-B-HSD2. And while you don't need to memorize that name, you absolutely need to understand what it does, because this enzyme acts like a safety switch that converts active cortisol into its inactive form, so it doesn't overstimulate mineralocorticoid receptors in your kidneys. And when this enzyme is functioning normally, it prevents cortisol from behaving like aldosterone, which is the hormone responsible for sodium retention and potassium excretion. But licorice contains an active compound called glycyrrhizin, and glycyrrhizin directly blocks this protective enzyme, meaning that when you consume licorice regularly, your body loses its ability to neutralize excess cortisol at the kidney level, and cortisol suddenly starts acting like aldosterone, even though your aldosterone levels may be normal. And this is why licorice can cause what looks like an endocrine disorder, even when no tumor or gland problem exists, because cortisol now tells your kidneys to hold on to sodium and water while flushing potassium out of the system, which increases blood volume, raises blood pressure, and destabilizes electrical signaling in the heart and muscles. And this condition is so well recognized that it even has a name: pseudo-hyperaldosteronism, meaning a false state of excess aldosterone that isn't coming from a tumor or adrenal disease, but from licorice itself. And this is critically important, because if a doctor does not know you are consuming licorice regularly, they could misdiagnose you with an adrenal tumor, hormonal disorder, or kidney issue, and send you down a completely unnecessary and stressful medical pathway, when the real solution is simply stopping the licorice. And to understand why this effect exists at all, you have to zoom out and look at human history, because thousands of years ago, sodium was extremely scarce, while potassium was abundant in plant-based diets, and our bodies evolved to conserve sodium aggressively to survive, and compounds like glycyrrhizin may have actually been beneficial in ancient environments by helping humans retain sodium during times of scarcity. But today, we live in the exact opposite world where sodium is everywhere, hidden in processed foods, snacks, sauces, breads, and restaurant meals, while potassium intake is shockingly low. And this is not a minor issue, because studies and nutritional surveys consistently show that roughly 98% of the population does not meet the recommended potassium intake of 4,700 milligrams per day, which is nearly everyone. And potassium is not optional for health. It is a foundational electrolyte, required for proper heart rhythm, nerve signaling, muscle contraction, energy production, insulin sensitivity, and glycogen storage in the liver. And when potassium drops too low, blood pressure rises, muscles cramp, fatigue increases, blood sugar control worsens, and the risk of dangerous arrhythmias skyrockets, especially in people who are older, dehydrated, stressed, or taking diuretics. And this is why licorice can take someone who is already mildly potassium deficient and push them into a severe deficiency without obvious warning signs until symptoms suddenly appear. And the risk is not usually from a single serving, but from chronic low-dose exposure that accumulates over days or weeks, such as drinking licorice tea every day, taking licorice root supplements for adrenal support, chewing licorice candy regularly, or combining multiple sources without realizing it. And just to put numbers on this, consuming more than 2 cups of licorice tea daily over time can be enough to start shifting electrolyte balance, while as little as 100 milligrams of licorice candy per day for a couple of weeks has been documented to cause clinically significant blood pressure elevation and potassium loss in susceptible individuals. And children, older adults, and people with underlying cardiovascular issues are especially vulnerable. And the risk increases dramatically if licorice is combined with medications like diuretics, blood pressure drugs, or synthetic corticosteroids such as prednisone, because now you're stacking multiple mechanisms that all promote sodium retention and potassium loss at the same time, which is why this combination is particularly dangerous and absolutely not recommended. And while it's true that licorice has been used medicinally for over 3,000 years, for ulcers, coughs, infections, inflammation, and digestive support, and it even appears in medical texts dating back to the early 20th century as a remedy, longevity of use does not mean universal safety. And this is where modern context matters, because ancient remedies were often used short-term, seasonally, or under very different dietary conditions, not daily for months in a high-sodium, low-potassium environment, while people are under chronic stress and taking pharmaceuticals. And it's also important to acknowledge that in certain very specific cases, such as individuals with clinically low cortisol under professional supervision, small amounts of licorice may be used therapeutically, but this is not something that should be self-prescribed or taken casually. And the good news is that there is a safer alternative for those who want the benefits of licorice without the hormonal disruption, and that is deglycyrrhizated licorice, commonly known as DGL, which has had the glycyrrhizin compound removed, meaning it does not block the protective enzyme, does not cause sodium retention, does not deplete potassium, and does not raise blood pressure, while still providing many of the gastrointestinal and immune benefits that licorice is known for, particularly for ulcers and gut inflammation, making DGL the preferred form for long-term use. And another critical point to understand is that the symptoms caused by excessive licorice intake are usually reversible, meaning if someone experiences rising blood pressure, swelling, weakness, or arrhythmias due to licorice, simply discontinuing it allows electrolyte balance and hormone signaling to normalize over time, which is why awareness is so powerful here, because this is a preventable and reversible issue. And while this discussion highlights a real danger, it should not be taken as an indictment of herbs in general, because the reality is that most herbs are incredibly beneficial and have far fewer side effects than pharmaceutical drugs, but they must be respected, understood, and used appropriately, especially in modern contexts where diet, stress, and medication use have changed dramatically. And one of the biggest gaps in healthcare today is that patients are rarely asked about supplements and herbs they are taking, which can lead to confusion, misdiagnosis, and unnecessary treatment when simple lifestyle factors are the real cause. And this is why transparency with healthcare providers is essential, because what you consume daily matters just as much as what you're prescribed. And since we're talking about optimizing health rather than just avoiding problems, it's worth noting that there are many simple herbs and foods you can use safely in your kitchen to support blood pressure, heart health, digestion, and metabolism without these risks. And learning how to use them properly can make a profound difference over time. And that's why I also share a free daily routine checklist that outlines simple habits, nutrition strategies, and lifestyle practices designed to support long-term health, energy, and resilience. Because real health isn't about fear or restriction, it's about understanding how the body works, respecting powerful tools like herbs, and using them intelligently so they work for you instead of against you.